Let's go over the sprint team roles that you'll be dealing with in April. For those of you who have done design sprints before, what you see on the screen is going to look very familiar. The one addition I usually do with the sprints that I run virtually as a co-facilitator, and I'll get into that in a second, but this is typically what you'll find, is that in some form or fashion, these 6 particular roles are well represented in any design sprint you do, especially in a virtual one. At a minimum, you want these on your virtual design sprint team. Now, if you wanted to penny pinch, you could potentially take a developer out of the mix to just have a facilitator, a designer, and a researcher. But in my experience, developers are really good at figuring out what the constraints are and what can be worked out versus what cannot. So if you can, I would definitely try to hit on these 4. If we go over each role individually, the facilitator is primarily responsible for the collaboration, structure, pace, and control of any particular design sprint. They're usually the person that is getting together the materials, understanding the scope of the engagement. They're monitoring and engaging other folks on the design sprint team for what they're doing, especially what kind of direction they need. They're really good at calling audibles when things kind of go off the track or things aren't as expected. Usually good instincts for facilitators are, especially in a virtual environment, to think about inclusion, empathy, especially for folks that have connection issues or have offline issues that prevent them from coming to the sprint. If you have those 2 in hand, usually facilitation is that much more pleasant for people that are involved with the design sprint. Co-facilitators are something I highly recommend, especially for people that are new to the design sprint process, are fairly junior to it, and need some assistance in understanding how to execute as well as to do design sprints. You definitely want a co-facilitator if you're working with a large group of people online, especially with virtual design sprints and being able to handle multiple teams. For co-facilitators, it's an opportunity to figure out what their talents and strengths are and how they match into the design sprint itself. They're there for the facilitator to kind of support them when they need it, especially if they go offline and have some issues there. They're really good at making sure the materials that you're presenting to your virtual team as well as to your audience are going to be good to go, that they're kind of overseeing the interview schedule for testing, and they're really, really good at being first points of contact. For designers, they're usually concentrating on the visual, the experiential, the functional, anything that has to do with the design. They're usually responsible for the overall group's approach to how they're going to be presenting and representing the solution. Now, depending on the strengths of the designer, they can act as both a teacher and a guide, especially on those ideation sessions that happen on Tuesdays, typically in a design sprint. The one thing on a virtual front that you definitely want to incorporate is that they own the storyboard process. They're critical in terms of bridging the conceptual work that's been done the first 2 days and translating that for a developer to kind of take the role or take the lead and work on anything that's done for the greater team. They're really good at, especially before a prototype even starts, on getting the whole team thinking about micro interactions, about how that design is going to be used. So designers are central to the success of the design sprint. I would argue that on virtual design sprints, they're even more needed to kind of give proper direction to the entire team and to get the team focused, especially before prototyping begins, when focus tends to stray a bit. I take a different approach to how developers can contribute to the design sprint process. In particular, it depends primarily on how they like to engage. In some cases, especially with voice design sprints, or things with 0D or physical devices, even for complex mobile applications on Android or iPhone, I found them to be either the most pivotal member of the team or the least consequential, and it really comes down to the strengths of the person and what they bring to the table. Chances are the developers you're looking for are not afraid to get their hands dirty, and they're ready to assist others and give feedback. In fact, they're really good at communicating constraints, both hard constraints that the team can't get around and soft ones where there are alternative paths to take. But primarily, their responsibility is going to be on the pre-prototype materials, making sure they follow particular guidelines that allow them to process the prototype. More often than not, I've seen them kind of being the repository for a lot of the work that's done the first 3 days and trying to make heads or tails of it, even if they have a design guide. So It's really their responsibility to align the entire design sprint team on what the handoff is supposed to be to development. Even if they are in the room the entire time, there are still some fundamental checks and balances, especially gateways, that developers need to make sure they do their work properly. I believe that researchers are one of the most important success factors to any design sprint, be it virtual or physical. They're primarily responsible for providing the right subject matter experts and interviewers for the team to engage with. If you don't get the right audience for your prototype, no matter how slick it is or how amazing it is, or even if you think you know exactly what you're shooting for in the problem framing phase, if you don't have the right audience, then it's going to really hamper your design sprint. I always try to get the best researcher I can because the best ones understand the problem space, the audience, and the outcomes almost as good as the facilitator. In fact, they actually make brilliant co-facilitators to begin with, and some of the best design sprints I've done have had those individuals in those roles. They can also guide the design sprint team on how to properly capture user feedback, which is somewhat of a lost art. You really need to know how to capture proper sees, says, and does from the folks that are looking at your prototype, and researchers will definitely guide everyone on that process and how to do it. Advisors may seem like they're an additional aspect to design sprints that are optional, but I've found that they have a really good grasp of the bigger picture and what the design sprint team should focus on. They tend to be fairly well networked. They probably know the domain that the design sprint team is working on, and they can also reach out to their network to find particular people that can help give the design sprint team some perspective. They're also really good at staying away from the internal strife and struggle that the design sprint team may go under, and are really good at elevating the conversation and moving it forward in a productive fashion. Now, there are additional sprint team roles that you can incorporate. Some popular ones are program and project managers to help bring additional structure, user-customer representatives to give some perspective on the outcomes that you're shooting for, as well as the prototype. My favorite is always using bench players, people that maybe have an hour or 2 hours of time that can really help during ideation, prototyping day, and user interviews. And finally, observers, people that are curious about the design sprint process, but really don't want to get involved and just kind of see it from afar. They can give some unbiased opinions about what they see and how to improve upon what you do. So after watching this video, I have some next steps for you, especially if getting ready for the April event. You definitely want to go and watch the 2016 videos from GV on the 5-day process if you haven't done so already. You can look at the bottom of this video in the show notes, and it should be there. Same with the AJ and Smart 2018 video on the 2.0 version of the design sprint, also in the show notes below, so you can check that out. And finally, I want you to think of your role you ideally want to play for your design sprint team in April. Do you want to be a researcher? Do you want to be a facilitator? Would you rather be a designer? A lot of it will depend on your background, but maybe you're interested in trying out a different role this time around. Whatever it is, give it a thought, and if you want to go ahead and reach out to me direct or post it here in this video and let me know, either way, we can capture that and make it part of the dialogue when we're organizing sprint teams in April. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please post them below. Otherwise, feel free to like and subscribe at your leisure, and stay tuned for more videos about the Global Virtual Design Sprint.